Hey everybody, I am back on the horse, so let's dive right into it. You might have seen some of my posts out there or other videos on YouTube or even some posts on Twitter that are talking about how we're kind of maybe facing some headwinds with AI research. And I wanted to unpack how irrespective of where we're at algorithmically, we can keep scaling models. We know that we can make models bigger, but there's a lot that goes into models that might really slow down the returns that we're hoping to see with artificial intelligence, particularly deep learning models and the transformer architecture. So let's get right into it. To provide a little bit of context, there is this graph that is circulating in the AI safety space and the AI research space on Twitter. And the primary question, and if you've been following me for any length of time, you know that I've been talking about the sigmoid curve for a long time. And so what a lot of people are saying is there's, at the early phases, it's really difficult to tell the difference between a sigmoid curve, or in this case, a logistic curve, and a true exponential curve. And so then I've been running some polls on my YouTube channel because you guys are pretty smart, and the wisdom of the masses does seem to apply because you guys are often right about these things. And so the first question, and I know my face is over it right here, so I'll just read the whole question. How far do you think the current AI paradigm, which is transformer, scale, and multimodality, will take us? And 16% said all the way to ASI, 15% only to AGI, and 50%, so this is a very slim majority, say most of the way to AGI, but a few other things are needed. And so it's relatively split. But, basically everyone is kind of coming to consensus that, transformer architecture plus scale plus multimodality, super powerful, but it's not really going to take us all the way across the finish line. Now, again, some people are balls to the wall, like it'll take us there. And there's a little bit more people in favor of AGI and ASI versus people that think it won't go much further. So this is a pretty good representation of kind of the opinions that I see out there on Twitter and on LinkedIn as well, which I'm back on, by the way. And then the second question says, what do you think the current AI paradigm, when do you think the current paradigm will run out? And then I said, basically, when do diminishing returns and rising costs slow everything down? And 22% said we're already past the inflection point. So if you use this graph, you say, okay, the inflection point, where are we? Are we at the inflection point? Are we still before it? Are we just after it? Are we still at the very beginning? And so 22%, almost a quarter, said we're already past the inflection point. And then 15 said that we're right at the inflection point. And then 33%, so that says less than 2 years away from the inflection point. So most people think that we're about here or beyond already. And a relatively few people, it's non-trivial, 30% of people say that it is either less than 10 years or more than 10 years until we get to the inflection point. So again, these numbers kind of surprise me a little bit because a lot of you in the audience are full accelerationist. And what I've always said is that acceleration is the default option just due to corporate competition and geopolitical competition. The acceleration is there. But with diminishing returns and rising costs, we might be heading for a new AI winter. Now, is it going to be within 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Is it going to, the biggest question is, where does this plateau happen? Are we 5 years from the plateau, 10 years, 20, and but also not only how far away is that plateau, where is that plateau? Is this plateau with the current paradigm just at or below or above human intelligence? Or kind of what another trend that I'm seeing out there on Twitter, and let me know if you want me to make another video about it, is what we're really discovering is multiple intelligences. And that is that there is something qualitatively different about human intelligence versus the kind of intelligence that we're building. And of course, a lot of people have speculated about this, saying that, AGI is going to be alien intelligence. And it's not that it's alien. It's not that it does things that we cannot do. It just does things that we have a harder time doing in the same way that we can do things, like Moravec's paradox is kind of what I'm referring to. You and I can navigate the physical world relatively easy, but math, language, some of those things that take us a little bit longer to acquire, computers have already dominated those. So anyways, this is some context of where I'm coming from. Now, I'm not going to show you a whole bunch of tweets, but this is some actual data based on where you guys are at. So then I figured I'd unpack it. So let's get into the rest of the video. So there's all kinds of exponential technology trends out there. I don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time perseverating on it because you get it. Like one of the top comments was, don't bet against Moore's Law, which Moore's Law has been going strong for like what, 6 decades now? Like that's nothing to shake a stick at, and there's no reason to think that it's going to end anytime soon. Also, the amount of data available continues going up exponentially. Back when I worked at Cisco Systems, we were like just constantly like the one of the key drivers for innovation on internet and switching hardware is just the amount of data. Basically, every time you go up a generation in routing and switching technology, like you can give people a 10x faster switch, and people will use that data pretty much instantly. And we still have not saturated in terms of like what the latent or unmet demand for switching and internet and routing technology is, because we have so much data. And basically, the more data you can transmit, the more data people want to send. So like what I'm saying is, if you were to create like an 8 terabit downlink or data center connection, people would use that almost instantly, because there's so many things out there that you can't do today because data transmission is just not fast enough. But again, like from Cat 5 to Cat 6, you go up a generation, you go from 100 megabit to 1 gigabit to 10 gigabit, like that was my home base in IT for more than a decade. And I'm telling you, like the amount of data that wants to be sent is orders of magnitude above where we're at. Now, so you got Moore's Law, you've got data proliferation, you've also got AI model growth. So basically the paradigm has been models go up in size about 10x every 6 to 12 months. Although with some of the news leaking out of OpenAI, where Mira Murati was saying, oh, GPT-5, we just started training it and there's no secret sauce. Will it be 10 times larger? Robert Miles had a really great video explaining that like there's probably not enough data on the planet to really truly train something that is 10 times larger. So we're running out of data, and it could be that in terms of the scaling laws, maybe data is the biggest constraint right now, because not all data is created equal. So let's get into the rest of these. So there's theoretical and practical limits, and this is one thing that I try and drive home to my audience as often as possible. Just because you have something conceptually that is like, okay, we have the Landauer limit, which is many orders of magnitude above the computational efficiency of what we've achieved today. There's a theoretical, like, okay, this is the maximum compute efficiency that is hypothetically possible, and then this is what we have practically achieved. So theory versus practice, or theory versus experimentation, can often be a very, very wide gap. And so just because with scaling laws and the transformer architecture, because I think, what is it, like the current gigantic models, they're about 80 layers deep. It's like, what if we go to 100 layers? What if we go to 200 layers? What if once we get to, transformers that are 1,000 layers deep? Just because you can put a number beside a thing doesn't mean that you practically have the ability to do it. Another example of this is architecture. Engineers and architects knew for decades how strong steel was, but there were so many other problems that prevented them from building skyscrapers that we have built today, that are approaching, 3,000 feet tall, like the Burj Al Khalifa, and then the super skinny skyscrapers in New York City that are being built. Just because you know the strength of steel doesn't mean that you can build a safe skyscraper. That's another example of, okay, we have the math to show how to get there, but that doesn't mean we know how to build it yet. And so that's really the point of this slide, is just, I really want to remind everyone that there can be huge, huge gaps between theoretical and practical limits. And so then another concept is the law of diminishing returns, which is basically, this is the definition here: when additional input results in proportionally smaller increase in output over time. And so this is what gets the sigmoid curve, is basically, you keep putting in more energy or more money or more material, but you get less and less returns in advance. It's kind of like food or exercise, right? Like your body is a system, and like you can put in, there's an optimal amount of food to put in, but if you put in more food to your body, you just get fat. And there's also an optimal amount of exercise, which is, you exercise up to about 300 minutes a week if you're in good health. And that's kind of like where you'll reach peak fitness. But if you double that to 600 minutes, you're actually just going to kill yourself because of exhaustion. Now, that is an example of diminishing returns, is that the peak fitness that you're capable of, just because you eat more and you exercise more, that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to run 60 miles an hour. You're not Captain America. right? You would need some kind of genetic engineering or something at that point. So a couple examples: population growth follows sigmoid curves. Genetic research, the cost of every advancement in genetic research and really all pharmaceuticals has gone up exponentially over time. And so these are plenty of other things. Oh, and lastly, sorry, I forgot this one. Unforeseen constraints, which is basically you hit a wall that you didn't know was going to be there. So all of these things are conspiring to create a tremendous amount of growing headwinds in the AI space. And believe me, like, I want to get there as fast as possible, just like you guys, but I've been warning you guys about this for about the last 2 years. Like, progress usually follows a sigmoid curve, and we don't have another paradigm to replace the current transformer plus scale plus multimodality paradigm. So speaking of the current paradigm, this is what is kind of we're at. So you might remember, or you might have heard, attention is all you need. So that attention is all you need paper kind of, blew up, and that was what allowed for transformers to scale. There was a whole bunch of other algorithmic breakthroughs on the attention window, on the loss functions, the actual math for training. Because back when I first got into artificial intelligence back in 2012, it was basically the conventional wisdom was, well, we can do backpropagation, but it's ludicrously expensive, so it's really just not practical at this time. And then a few years later, some mathematical breakthroughs made that backpropagation, which is the primary way that training is done in these networks, this is actually more efficient and we have better loss functions. So then, you have attention is all you need, and then you had scale is all you need, and now we're adding multimodality. So you have the transformer architecture plus scale plus multimodality to basically take in as much data as possible. But eventually, as I and others have mentioned, we're running out of data, and we're kind of expanding and maximizing this paradigm. Now, one thing that I will say, and I don't have a slide to address this, is that in the long run, we will continue finding commercial uses and integrations for the current technology that we have for a while to come. Because even if models don't get much smarter, they're pretty big, their windows are enormous, you can give them API controls, you can put them in robots, there's all kinds of things that you can continuously explore for this. One thing that I realized when I was an automation engineer, back in like 2015, 2016 to 2018 or so, is if you had enough automation engineers as good as me, we could have automated most of the economy already. And that's just with PowerShell and Python. But the thing is not every automation engineer is as good as I was. It's just a simple fact. And it's not even a matter of necessarily good, it's you don't have enough. So what people hope is that, okay, well, if artificial intelligence, GPT-5 or whatever, is a good automation engineer and it can continue automating other stuff, well, there you go. Then you can completely scale up, and then you have hyperabundance, and everyone lives in utopia forever and ever afterwards. That's what we're hoping, but I'm here to tell you, don't shoot the messenger. I've got some bad news. It'll probably take a little bit longer to get there than we would probably prefer. But there's a silver lining to this, which I'll talk about by the end of the video. So, data constraints. We have exhausted all available data. I remember, some people at OpenAI and others are like, hey, we scraped pretty much the entire internet. And then when you saw the paper that came out last year, where it's basically textbooks are all you need, and what they found is that highly curated, high quality data actually does better than just massive piles of messy, noisy data. And so there's a few things that are conspiring here. So one, we've exhausted pretty much all available data. And then when you realize that quality counts for a lot more than quality, or quality counts for more than quantity, in data, high quality data is harder and harder to come by. It's also exponentially more expensive to get. And this is why you see companies like OpenAI signing deals where it's like, oh, hey, we're going to pay to get money from, Forbes or whatever. So they're buying news like, okay, if they've already exhausted the available data where they're going to have to purchase it from them. I think other people are buying data from Springer, which is the scientific article publication. So it's like, okay, now the biggest constraint is the amount of high quality data in the world. And just because Google has probably trained Gemini on every YouTube video. And of course, we add more videos every day, like what I'm doing here. But the thing is like, you just kind of put it all together in your head and it's like, okay, well, we've consumed all the good data, all the bad data. And so now we're left with synthetic data, which has, maybe good, maybe bad results. But again, with predictable scaling laws, it's like, how many orders more magnitude data than we have today is it going to be required to get to that next tier? And, you know, looking at what some people have pointed out, Robert Miles and others, is like, it's going to be a while before we even can produce enough data to get to that hypothetical next thing. Now, that's notwithstanding the possibility of more algorithmic breakthroughs where you can do more with less. There's distillation. There's, you know, maybe you do more training epochs on the same data. Who knows? But the thing is, you know, there hasn't been a whole lot of movement on that front, just at least not something that's going to move the needle in a significant enough way. Energy constraints. So this is becoming a bigger and bigger topic. Now, I know some of you out there in the comments say like energy is basically infinite, which, like, yes, you know, we have a gigantic hydrogen fusion reactor just a couple million miles away, and it's producing many, many terawatts, actually exawatts of energy that we have imminent access to. So we just have to tap into it. You know, like solar is technically fusion when you break it down, and we can produce where solar is actually getting so cheap that the price of solar has collapsed in China. So if you've been following solar for a while, I think it was back in 2014 or 2015, maybe a little bit afterwards, America, the US, we were afraid of China like flooding the market with cheap Chinese solar, and it crashed our local solar stockpile price. But now it's so cheap in China that it's crashed their price too. So solar is becoming stupidly cheap. But even still, the orders of magnitude that are going to be required, again, because all of these scaling laws are relatively predictable, it doesn't necessarily add up economically. Because, you know, you hear figures, and it's not technical, like Sam Altman is not actually trying to raise $7 trillion for energy, but he is investing in fusion, and plenty of other people are investing in fusion, and we would need something like that in order to keep advancing at our current pace. This is what I mean by exponentially rising costs and diminishing returns, is that, okay, you know, your first training run took 10 kilowatts, and your second training run took 100, you know, megawatts, and then now training runs are measured in like the gigawatts, and then they're probably going to be measured in the terawatts, so on and so forth. And so they are becoming just so much more expensive, all the while, like, we don't know if it's going to be even commercially viable. And so this is where you have many, many knock-on effects, because even if you can train the model, then you still have to run the model. You know, you've probably heard news reports in the last year or so that, like, you know, every time you talk to ChatGPT, it takes like 5 gallons of water or something like that, which, oh, by the way, water infrastructure. So we need energy infrastructure. We need data infrastructure. We need water infrastructure. Literally, we have to revamp our entire infrastructure, including the internet, to get enough data moving around in order to do all this stuff. So we have a lot of headwinds, and we're not even halfway through the video yet. Hardware constraints. So it takes time to build data centers. This is where, you know, Sam Altman kind of quirky tongue-in-cheek said, you know, it takes time for the concrete to dry in data centers. And you've probably also heard in the news, I think that there's like 5 new gigantic data centers going in, what was it, West Virginia? And it's like, okay, cool. There's probably plenty of reasons for that. There's like the Lambda rail, so like you want data centers to be as close as possible to the trunk lines that basically tie the backbone of the internet together. You also need access to adequate energy. You need access to adequate water for cooling. And there's been rumors of people in those areas that saying like they're basically the power companies are telling the AI companies, you can't build any more data centers here because we can't afford to power them. You would cause blackouts. And so, again, lots of infrastructure gets tied up in this stuff. And I don't know that we've had a mobilization since probably the major mechanization and industrialization of World War II that would be required to fully get AI across the finish line with some of the predictable scaling laws. Now, I'm not saying that it's not going to happen. Don't get me wrong. Like, I know that some of you guys are probably out there in the audience like, no, we got to make it happen. And I agree. And again, accelerationism is the default because of corporate competition, because of geopolitical competition. At the same time, like, this is a tall order. Like, we have to basically become a Kardashev like 0.7 civilization just to power our own AI, right? I've been on several other podcasts where we're joking about this, like how much power is going to go into this. And it's like, you take the grand total of how much power humans use and then how much power AI uses in like the pie chart, it's going to be like a tiny sliver is going to be us and the rest is going to be AI data centers. So before we finish out the video, I want to give you some quick updates about what I've been up to. So by popular demand, I split my Patreon into 2 tiers. A lot of people have messaged me from around the world saying that $10 US is a little bit steep. So I've lowered the price of all access to $5 a month. And then I did create a higher tier for people who want to chat with me. There's dedicated chat channels on Patreon and Discord if you want to chat with me directly. And I'm on Discord most of the day to interface with all of my fans out there. I'm also on Substack, so I'm writing out there. So if you want more content that's deeper dive, hit me up on Substack. It's all free on Substack, but some people choose to support me on Substack rather than being a channel member here or on Patreon. I get it. Some people don't like Patreon. Even some of my fellow creators have told me that they don't like Patreon. I like Patreon, but whatever. If you don't, that's fine. Go ahead and sign up on Substack if you want to. I'm also back on Twitter and LinkedIn. So after getting through some burnout and I'm on the road to recovery, I'm back on more social media platforms. So I'm Dave Shappy on Twitter and then Dave Shapp on LinkedIn. And then also my book is just about done. We're doing a final proofreading pass just to make sure that there's no mistakes on the page, and then it will be launched. And then lastly, I do have 4 other channels that if you go to my homepage here on YouTube and just scroll down a little bit, I've got all my other channels linked, which some people are happy to discover, but now you know. Okay, so back to the show. Exponentially rising costs. So all of these things, you can say, okay, well, it hypothetically takes more data. It hypothetically takes more water or energy or whatever. We're starting to put numbers on this. The first training runs, I remember when I think it was GPT-2 was like $5 million. Maybe it was not even that much. But then GPT-3, that was like, whoa, it took, $17 million to train GPT-3. And then who knows how much it took to train GPT-4 and how much it's going to take to train GPT-5. But you look at the curve and it's going up logarithmically. It's like every next generation takes about 10 times more dollars. So that's the economics. It's going to take 10 times more for each successive generation unless and maybe even if we get to economies of scale. Because like I said, imagine, if we figure out a way to transmit 10 times more data, make 10 times more energy, and move 10 times more water, that might keep the scale low, but those are non-trivial projects. 10xing the throughput of the internet, that's not easy. 10xing the amount of good data that we have in the world, that's not easy. 10xing our water capacity, that would solve literally a global water crisis. And so this technological thing, I'm not saying any of this is impossible. I'm saying all of these are good ideas, but the order is it's a very tall order to get through all of this stuff. So I want to titrate expectations is kind of the purpose of this video. And so what we have to do ultimately is a cost-benefit analysis. And this is what some people are afraid of. And I'm not a hardliner here. I'm just reporting what I have seen on the Twitters and in other places. Some people say that AI wouldn't even be affordable today, that it's not even commercially viable because we don't have price fit because AI has never been, fully viable, whatever. It doesn't pay for itself. It's too expensive. And I don't know about all those numbers because, again, a lot of those numbers are going to be kept private. Like if ChatGPT is operating at a loss, which I think when it launched it was, ChatGPT might not be operating at a loss anymore. But certainly, the rumors are out there. And so imagine if every AI model that we're all using, because we're all using a lot of AI models, are basically just burning through their runway because of VC investment. Those investments, if they don't find a way to become profitable, are going to dry up, and then the cost of AI is going to go much higher. So you might say, okay, well, it still makes sense because from a long-term perspective, all the tech companies and all of us know this is the way of the future. So what you do is you subsidize it in the early days until it sticks, and then once it becomes viable, then you just let it take over. Solar is the same thing, as well, also electric vehicles, because the governments around the world wanted solar, so they subsidized it. It was not commercially viable, but it is now, and now it sells itself. Same thing for electric vehicles. Most of the electric vehicle subsidies have also ended because now there is a durable demand for it. So that might be kind of what we're seeing, but it would be really interesting because if it's Google and Amazon and Meta and Microsoft are subsidizing AI, not a government, they are basically investing saying, hey, we're going to make this cheap enough for you so that it's attractive enough so that you become dependent upon it so that when the price does raise, and that's going to piss a lot of people off, by the way, and I predict that it will, when the price does go up, people say, well, we're already dependent on it, so we got to keep it going. This is kind of like why you've seen cable and internet prices kind of continue to go up, although those have kind of flatlined. There's a whole other can of worms I'm not going to get into. My point here, though, is that we, the individuals, whether it's consumers or companies that are consuming AI services, are going to have to do a cost-benefit analysis as well as the providers of the AI, because if they are still subsidizing it internally, that might mean that it's not necessarily commercially viable. Now, as we wind down, I just want to remind you of a couple other things. So, nuclear fusion. We achieved nuclear fusion decades ago. We just didn't achieve it in a commercial power generation thing, commercial power generation paradigm. So the practical reality of making nuclear fusion viable versus what's actually hypothetically possible. And, people say like, oh, nuclear fusion, the joke is it's always 10 years away. It's looking closer now, but it wouldn't be the first time that we thought that nuclear fusion was much closer. Now, one thing that I do say is follow the money. And when you see a huge bull rush, there's like a whole bunch of FOMO out there in the VC world, in the capital markets. A whole bunch of people are buying into fusion, so we might be closing in on that. But even if we unlock fusion, that's only one piece of the puzzle. Now, that will help with every other piece. It'll help us power the data centers. It'll help us get more water. It'll help us, build bigger internet and more internet and faster internet. But at the same time, just because something is theoretically possible does not mean that it is eminently practical to do, or that even if it is practical, doesn't mean it's going to be cheap. And likewise, genetic medicine. We unlocked the genome back, more than 2 decades ago now. And the promise was we were going to uncover everything and fix everything. But, how often do you go to the doctor and they say, oh yeah, like here's your genome? The medical establishment doesn't really use genetic medicine. I've gone to a few medical specialists who do use some genetic information to like help steer your health, like personalized medicine. But that's still kind of considered fringe. Like you talk about that to a traditionally trained endocrinologist, they're like, okay, whatever. I don't really care about genetics. Tell me your family history, which, genetics and family history is more or less the same thing. But the health outcomes of your family are far more predictive than even genetic profiles are today. So again, lots of headwinds despite the potential promise of genetic medicine, despite the potential promise of nuclear fusion. There's a will, but there's not necessarily a way. So, as we wind down, and I probably should have put this up sooner, but for anyone who's stuck around to this time, here you're going to be let in on the good stuff. So, safety ramifications. If AI is slowing down, this is the best news for the safety community ever, because it means we will have time to adapt to the current paradigm. Like, yes, we're going to have Gemini with 10 trillion token window, but it might not be that much smarter than it is today. It might have multimodality. It might be able to do perfect deepfakes. But if it's going to be exponentially more expensive to make further progress, at least for the foreseeable future, that gives us all time to adapt to the current safety and security paradigm. Pardon me, tripping over my words. And so that means we're basically kicking the can down the road, or not really. The can was further down the road than we realized. And that is actually a really good thing from a safety perspective. And it's also a good thing from a jobs perspective, at least in some respects. If you're saying like, well, hey, how do we pay for everything? It's going to give us more time to adapt to changing jobs markets. Yes, some jobs are going to get destroyed. New jobs are going to get created. The economy as a whole is going to increase. Maybe there'll be less waste because we'll be able to have better oversight, because these things can read literally millions of pages a day to make sure that every log gets recorded, every voicemail gets listened to, every email gets responded to, and so on and so forth. But because it's slowing down, this will give us time for not just safety adaptation, but economic adaptation. And that could actually be a really good thing for the world, because we don't necessarily want things to just change all at once. Now, again, I know that there's a lot of people out there saying, I just want to quit my job. Believe me, I'm right there with you. There are a million things that I would do differently. Even if I didn't have to work and make money on YouTube, I still got to eat too. And I would still live differently than I do today in a potential hyper abundant future. And then finally, the geopolitical ramifications. So if, say, for instance, the plateau, the sigmoid curve, if it tapers off around human intelligence, but it's really ridiculously expensive. It's a lot of energy, a lot of data centers are needed, a lot of water infrastructure is needed. It's going to be different, but it's not going to be like this runaway snowball effect where we get hard takeoff, fast takeoff, whatever you want to call it, because chip fabs. We're going to need more data centers. Like, just because you have the weights doesn't mean you can deploy it somewhere. This is one of the key things that I want to drive home, is because you have 1 billion people or 8 billion people all trying to use AI. That's a lot of data centers that you need to build up to even just host that many models. So that requires high-end researchers, infrastructure, as I've been talking about, power, water, data, infrastructure. We need so much infrastructure to get to that future. So yeah, it's going to be. It's like I said, it's a silver lining. It's a mixed blessing, because on the one hand, it'll give us a little bit more time to adapt to this current paradigm, but it means that we're not going to get the benefits. We're not going to get them sooner. Instead, they're going to come later. So thanks for coming with me on this adventure. Let me know what you think in the comments. Yeah, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but again, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's good news. It's bad news. It's news. But we'll see how it turns out. Could be wrong, but consensus is building out there that this is the direction that we're going. Is it going to be a full AI winter? I don't think so. But certainly change is going to slow down, I think, at least for a little while. Bye.